Aztecs were one of the most successful civilizations of all time, originating from a nomadic tribe in Mesoamerica. Their empire spanned roughly from 14th century to the 16th century, which the Spanish conquerors conquered the Aztecs, ending their civilization in Mexico. The Aztecs were a religious and powerful civilization using their nomadic ways. They chose to settle on an island which supplied them with goods. Aztec's religion was based on gods that heavily influenced their life and the meaning of living. However, the Aztec religion was a brutal civilization that sacrificed warriors to their gods. The geographic location of the Aztec religion was located in Mesoamerica. The reason they settled here was because they originated as a nomadic tribe in northern Mexico, and later on they arrived in Mesoamerica around the beginning of the 13th century. Then they established their capital city, Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs lived on an island in Mexico where it was very hot and humid. The soil was perfect for growing crops, which enabled them to supply their culture with food. Aztecs had protection from the mountains surrounding the island as well. Tenochtitlan had given them the ability to practice their beliefs and rituals without any issues occurring, hence contributing to their belief as it is easier practice. The geographical feature of Mexico is very hot and humid. This shows a contribution of Mexico's humidity to their belief, worshipping the sun god. Origin of the universe. In the beginning there was Ome. Ome was both male and female. Ome was the ultimate god representing everything and then created 4 children. The 4 children were Huitzilopochtli, Quetzal, Tezcatl, and Zipi. Each one of them had their own direction. H was south, and Quetzal was east, Tezcatl was west, and Zipi was north. The 4 gods began to create the universe. First they created a creature named Kipitl, which had lived in the water. The 4 gods had slain Kipitl, but at least the cost of had slain Kipitl. The creation of a sun reoccurred 5 times. Firstly, it was the jaguar son was Tezcatl, but Quetzalcoatl was envious, so he struck him. The principal beliefs. The primary Aztec belief system was based around the gods. The Aztecs worshipped over 1,000 gods. They also believed in 13 heavens and 9 hells. Another principal belief was that they were created to serve the gods and everything they had done for them, because they were controlled by the gods from birth to death. The Aztecs strongly believed in the afterlife. It was the way Aztecs died rather than the way they lived that determined whether they would go to the sun god or go to the miserable underworld. These principles were significant to the Aztecs because they had shown what importance God had towards the people. The principal beliefs had shown a way of life for the people with certain boundaries and purpose to live in. Aztecs performed their rituals and sacrifices to please the gods. The beliefs about the afterlife heavily relied on their religion. There were different realms a person could go to in the afterlife. A warrior had died in battle or by sacrifice went either to paradise in the east and joined the sun's rising in the morning, or joined the war god Huitzilopochtli in battle. On the contrary, those who died of illnesses, old age, or unremarkable death went to Mictlan, the Aztec underworld. The Aztecs ruled the area from the Gulf of Mexico to the Cordilleras and southward into Guatemala. Mexico was ruled by an emperor named Montezuma II, who was not very well or did not run his empire very well. When tribes or cities had rebelled, he had no army to control, therefore having to reconquer them. Many define this is one of the reasons why the Spanish army had conquered the Aztecs. The society of Aztecs was very advanced, with them being one of the most superior civilizations. Every 52 years, fires were put out. Cooking implements, hearths, stones, and idols were thrown out of the house, showing their practices and had a relationship with their belief of satisfying the gods. The practice of human sacrifice is also related to the Aztec belief which was the nourishment was required to feed the gods, which was another source of pleasure. Their beliefs and ethics were heavily reflected in society and their way of living and their architecture. These include sculptures or such of the gods that Aztecs worship. One aspect of the Aztec life cycle was when at home. Most lived at a settlement, farming existence, planting crops and grazing animals, performing rituals to make sure their crops grow. Most of modern day Aztecs still follow their beliefs of gods and still reside in Mexico. The current Aztec religion does not only consist of their old beliefs but also contains Roman Catholicism. The Aztecs were divided into 2 main classes, nobles and commoners. The noble class consisted of government and military leaders, and the commoner class consisted of farmers, artisans, merchants, and low-level priests. Nobles were permitted to receive acknowledgement from commoners through goods and services. The Aztecs also had slaves, who were the prisoners of war who had not been sacrificed. Slaves had the right to marry, have children, and more. This shows that being a slave for Aztecs was not so restrictive. Tenochtitlan was a central area for Aztecs. It contained pyramids, and one ceremony this society had participated in was, as mentioned before, the human sacrifice. Another Aztec ceremony was a ceremony performed once every 52 years called the New Fire Ceremony. Also, a festival known in the Aztecs was Atlaculo, which was from February 13th to March 4th every year. The deities in the festival were Tlaloc, Tetlacu, and Chauchitlicu. The traditional celebration of the festivals of Atlacu were particularly joyous because it's coming after the dead days. Aztecs are known for their celebrations of death. They also celebrated birth and childbirth. After birth, the family brought in a fortune teller to tell the child's fate. According to the Aztecs, the day and time of birth decide whether the child would be wealthy, poor, or have a good or bad character. A new baby born was significant, not only the individual remarking a new child in their family. Their celebration of death is very significant as it practices their beliefs, which is involving everything around the gods. Death and burial. The afterlife was a major significance to the whole society. It had meant more than life itself, and accompanying the sun god in the afterlife was the Aztec's main focus. Therefore, it shows that afterlife is very significant to society, as they will fight in their life to live a great and peaceful afterlife. Most Aztecs were cremated at death, and they were generally clothed very nicely and placed in a squatting position and wrapped in cloth. There were also certain rituals if the person would have been taken to the underworld. Sometimes the man had been burned with a living dog, with a dog representing a guide in the underworld. The dead were burned or buried with the goods that would help in the travels to Mitlan, which was the underworld, such as food, water, blankets, jade, and clothes. This meant that the belief in the afterlife was a huge influence towards the Aztecs. Sacred spaces inside. The priests of Aztec religion went to these temples to pray and make offerings to their gods. This was done so they become stable and also keep them strong. Templo Mayor was a sacred area in Tenochtitlan. It was the main religious building of the city, and it had two shrines on the top of it. One of the shrines was also Huitzilopochtli, and the other to Tlaloc. This was an area where many rituals were performed, with the most noticeable being human sacrifices. The reason that Aztecs had done sacrifices was without a doubt to fulfill the gods' needs. This ranged from their hearts being sacrificed to nourish some gods, to humans being sacrificed as a form of worship or thanking for the good harvest that was provided. However, not only was this the only reason for sacrifice. Production of water had gone too high, and a particular bridge required the sacrifice of an important official. This would be done by sacrificing them and throwing their heart onto the water to reduce the levels. The search of meaning for Aztecs. The search for meaning or the meaning of life revolved around the gods that they had worshipped. Their whole religion, society, rituals, ceremonies, and festivals occurred for one primary reason: serving their god, as they believed in them being controlled by the gods from birth to death. It was significant for them to please the gods. Pleasing the gods came in different forms. Fire ceremonies were done, and the most common was sacrificing their own people to their gods. Meaning was also understood as the knowledge of life. For the Aztecs, however, it was much more important to learn the knowledge of the afterlife, as the afterlife in their religion was more significant to their life during the earth. This was shown through their approach towards life and how serious they had taken afterlife. Examples of this had been the burial rituals, where they would be buried with items they would need in the afterlife to assist them, or maybe even the sacrifice of the nobles' wives, for example, to be buried with them. The Aztecs, here you can see the Aztecs and the Aztec festivals and ceremonies. Thank you.